We love it here on Clay and Buck when we can share good news with you. We are a happy warrior, positive, the future is ours vibe here. And even after we have a little bit of a disappointing midterm, we got some good things today. The House is officially 100% in Republican hands. And let's do a quick moment here to thank New York, Florida, California for beating the odds in those states and some tough congressional fights going red. Without that, and also our friend Lauren Boebert, for example, out in Colorado, without some of these close races, Clay, we wouldn't have taken the House. I mean, it actually, if we didn't know, and we're going to get into some of these numbers in a second, but the big news that just broke as we were in commercial break is, well, we can hear it from her. Here's Nancy Pelosi talking about her future or not so future aspirations of what she's going to do in Congress. Play it.
My friends, no matter what title you all, my colleagues, have bestowed upon me, Speaker, Leader, Whip, there is no greater official honor for me than to stand on this floor and to speak for the people of San Francisco. This I will continue to do as a member of the House, speaking for the people of San Francisco, serving the great state of California, and defending our Constitution. And with great confidence in our caucus, I will not seek reelection to Democratic leadership in the next Congress.
Nancy Pelosi no longer even going to try to be in Democrat congressional leadership. You know, sometimes you got to just savor the small victories, Clay.
We retired her effectively as a leader. Now, she may hang on. There's talk that she wants her daughter to take over that district potentially in San Francisco. We'll see exactly how that goes. But again, I understand people wanted the red wave. You and I did. We wanted the red tsunami. We got some data for you on the House, but I do think you have to say, okay, the biggest part of this midterm was to ensure that Joe Biden could do no more harm, and we have now done that by taking the House. Now, still a lot of work left to do in 2024. As we said, basically the 2024 election has already started. I mean, Trump's already announced. You saw where it's already been announced that Joe Manchin has a Republican challenger in West Virginia. I mean, we're not stepping off the treadmill at all. This race is going to be continuing. Next big shoe to drop, I would say, is Joe Biden officially announcing his decision, which I would expect we'd get sometime after the first of the year, you know, if he's going to be running, which you and I both think he is. It's ready. It's go time for 2024.
And I got to say, there is – now, you mean on the congressional side?
Yes.
Right. Yes. Because I saw this piece in the American Spectator by Scott McKay, and I think he makes some really critical points. I pulled from some of this. This guy does a politics newsletter, I believe, called Hayride. I'm not familiar with his work from before. I do know the American Spectator, obviously. And Scott has this piece. It isn't time to care who the 2024 nominee is until Republicans learn how to beat Democrats at their own game. It won't matter. Now, there are a few very important insights, Clay, that I think this guy, Scott McKay, points out here or pulls out for all of us. First one is this. I want to start with this. He writes, well, the public did its job with zero effort on the part of the GOP. Voters went from -7 million to +5 million on the Republican side in 2 years. Let's just pause there for a second. He's pointing out, my friends, because a lot of you are saying, well, we thought there was going to be a red wave. There was a red wave. It just splashed in the wrong states. It wasn't distributed in the way that would be needed to get the victories that we needed. A 12 million vote swing in 2 years. Okay, the numbers are in. Just think about that. A 12 million vote swing, 5 million plus Republicans voted over Democrats this time around. So what he says here is that the red wave happened. It ran up against seawalls all across the country. That's really important. And then he gets into the basics here, Clay, is how did, and I'm going to paraphrase here because I don't want to read too much from this guy's piece, American Spectator, it's a great piece. How is it that someone like Kari Lake loses to Katie Hobbs? How does that happen? Well, because while we're sitting here saying Kari Lake, so compelling, so, fiery, has a vision, would do a good job, Katie Hobbs, and we mean literally during that month leading up to the election, she was overseeing the election and in the election and making sure ballots, out, ballots, counted, running the machinery of the election to her favor, while we're sitting around saying she won't debate Carrie Lake. She didn't have to debate Carrie Lake, and she knew that. Now, I'll get into, there's another critical point here, Clay, just real quick. Everybody, one thing that comes through in this piece, it's not it was rigged or it was stolen in this or any election. It can be both. And if you don't address the way that it's rigged, it doesn't even matter because you're never going to get to whether it was stolen.
Yeah, and Buck, the way to bring this home, I think, for a lot of people out there listening, and I've been reading about these numbers as well. First of all, a 12 million swing is crazy, right? So you went from, according to the tally, 7 million more votes for Joe Biden in 2020 to 5 million more votes for Republicans in 2022. If you had told anyone that, like if you've been able to look at the returns and analyze it, heck, if you had just looked at California, New York, and Florida and what happened there, where we effectively won the House, you would say, my goodness, there's going to be a red tsunami everywhere. What I read that is so important, I think, for everybody to understand, Democrats' get out the vote operation is so much more sophisticated right now than what Republicans have, that using Arizona as an example, they are able to bank millions of votes all over the country. And it's not just banking those votes that matters. They know who voted. So they can target on everybody who has not voted as opposed to having to focus on the entire get out the vote operation. I think this is important for everybody out there to understand. If you and your neighbor go vote and you are Republicans, but you wait until Election Day to do it, then they're continuing to pound you and try to make sure that you go out and vote. Once they know that your ballot is in and you are a high propensity Republican voter, they can go focus on somebody else down the street who may not be likely to vote. That's what Democrats did. They knew when they got their votes in, and they were able to go after a shrinking circle of persuadable voters and put all their attention on them. Hey, we need you to fill out this ballot. We need you to get out. Whereas Republicans are still trying to address a large majority. The other thing is, Buck, the late surges. When you look at Fetterman or you look at Mark Kelly, they've already banked millions of votes before the debate even happens in Pennsylvania. So you're continuing to go after a smaller persuadable asset, and so many people have already voted. It doesn't even matter if you get that late surge like I think Republicans did as much, because 60% of the vote may already be in.
And this is where I think it's so important that everyone understand who has concerns, particularly about what happened in Arizona. The people who are pointing out how this works are not saying there aren't shenanigans, but we got multiple problems here.
Yes.
And if these things aren't fixed, it's never going to get better in these states. And if you want to win the presidency, look, there's an argument to be made here that what really matters, because you're not, with Joe Biden in office, you're not going to be able to do great and amazing things, even if you have the House and the Senate. That's just a fact. So we're in a much better position running for the Senate next time around based on what turf Democrats will have to defend. We already have a majority in the House. Likely we can add to that majority. And obviously it's all going to depend on the presidential race. To win the presidency, you have to win these states. How do you win these states? That's what we are trying to focus in on like a laser. Back to this piece in The Spectator about Arizona. He said, the proof is everywhere that this is how it works. Do you think it's somehow a coincidence that more than 70 of the 220-something tabulators in Maricopa County, almost all of them in Republican areas, suddenly went on the fritz on Election Day, and those ballots were collected and sent to a central office where they weren't counted for days while the public watched in suspicion and horror? You don't even need to count those ballots. All you have to do is weigh the boxes and do the math. You'll know how many other boxes need to come through the back door to offset the vote. I mean, he's laying out what the problems are here in the process overall, and they needed to be fixed, and they weren't fixed.
I'll give you a great example too, Buck. Look at Florida. We knew exactly what the vote tallies were of early voting before we even got to Election Day. And we knew, for instance, that Republicans were going to win that race by a massive amount. I think every state needs to be putting out these early vote tallies to help be, first of all, more reliable. I think every state needs to follow what Florida does so they can have reliable data on what the voters did within a few hours after the polls close. But we got to get way more sophisticated. Look, you're in an arms race effectively. And if you are not trying to get all of your voters out to the polls as early as possible, and I understand because I like it, Buck. I like going in on Election Day and voting. I know a huge percentage probably of our listeners feel that same way. But, man, we can't be a party that focuses on just Election Day turnout. We got election months. And if you're not fighting the battle all month long and encouraging your voters to get out, then at the end of the process, you're not able to target those low propensity voters like Democrats have been able to do. We got to fix it. We got to get more sophisticated. The numbers were there. They just weren't there in the places where we needed them the most. Alaska. We were just talking about how the system gets rigged and how impactful it can be. So this ranked choice voting in Alaska, Dave Wasserman, who runs Redistrict, does a good job, Cook Political Report. Alaska's congressional district is going to go for the Democrats. That's despite the fact that 60% of Alaskans voted Republican. But due to this ranked choice voting, essentially Alaska is going to have a congressional seat stolen, which could have been really significant, right? It looks like it's going to end up 222, 213 in the House. But imagine if that was the difference between a majority or not. That's a big deal. And it's also going to steal a Senate seat, effectively, for Lisa Murkowski. We've got to be, I think, Buck, super cognizant of any attempt to change the way that voting occurs, particularly if you hear ranked choice. Because I just want to emphasize this again. If Alaskans voted like pretty much everybody else does in the whole country, Kelly Tshibaka would be representing Alaska in the Senate, and a Republican would be representing Alaska's House seat. Instead, you get Lisa Murkowski, who's a fake Republican, and you now get a Democrat representing Alaska, even though the vast majority of Alaskans did not vote for that to happen. This ranked choice voting scheme is a scam that Lisa Murkowski and her crew put in place. Alaskans got bamboozled, and you got to watch out for this all over the country.
I mean, we have a republic, not a democracy, as we all know, even though Democrats are always talking about threats to our democracy. And really, democracy is a process. And if they can control the process to favor their constituencies and their political interests, they're going to get the desired outcome, right? This is the way that the system actually works. And so understanding that and having a strategy on the ground to counter that is the only way. I mean, otherwise we just sit around getting frustrated. Of course we shouldn't have lost that seat in Alaska, right?
Yep.
I mean, if it had been a normal vote, it would be Sarah Palin from and obviously Kelly Tshibaka on the Senate side and Sarah Palin on the congressional side. They changed the rules because they knew what it would do, right? I mean, this is another version of everything else we've talked about with the possibility of, does a third party candidate get on the ballot or not? Well, in places like Arizona, libertarian candidate, even though he bailed at the last minute, got 2% of the vote. These things matter.
Yep.
And that's really the lesson that we have here, because if you're wondering where the red wave was, there was a red wave. That the polls picked up on a massive shift in sentiment that was real. A 12 million vote shift in a midterm, not a presidential election, a midterm election is massive. But if you don't get it in the right places, it just doesn't really matter. You have to get the points on the board when you need them, Clay.